Like, no pressure, but the moves you make over the next couple of weeks might determine whether you win your fantasy championship or not. I don't just mean who you stream, right? Who you're going to play on a weekly basis. Let's talk stash. You know that all season long, been telling you beat the breakout, right? Pick up this rookie before he gets a chance. Pick up this player before he goes off. And that has paid off big time if you've stashed certain players. But playoffs is totally different. In the playoffs, there is no next week. You need those players with that massive ceiling, and there is no player that has a higher ceiling than that backup running back who suddenly becomes the starter. So sure, it's too late to pick up guys like Rico Dowdle, but there are plenty of running backs still out there that are seemingly devoid of value as of right now that could be extremely valuable in just a couple of weeks. So this week on the stash video, let's talk about the top 10 running back handcuffs that you need to stash. I'm talking about those backup running backs that could actually wind up being league winners. Now, before we get to the list, I'm going to clarify here. I'm not talking about guys who are like the 1B or in a timeshare, who technically might not be the starter. Look, David Montgomery doesn't count here, right? This is a guy who's in a timeshare. He's somebody who isn't a handcuff, purely a backup. And I'm not going to include guys like I mentioned, Kyle Monungai, who's now definitely carved out a role and is getting carries regularly, can see double-digit touches on a weekly basis. And even a guy like Bashal Tootin was on the fence, but I don't think I'm going to include him because I feel like he has now established himself as part of that backfield. I've already told you to pick him up on the waiver wire. I'm not going to tell you just to stash him. And so some of these names, you might debate whether you think they're handcuffs or not. I'm just telling you, these are guys who right now don't have standalone value, but you want them, especially if you have the starting running back on that team. But even if you don't, these are the types of sneaky stashes you can make that could pay off huge. And to that end, take a quick peek at the Bell Cow report. This is something Fantasy Points, which we use their data all the time. It's a great source. They put out on the regular this Bell Cow report. You can find that data as well on the site. So, ironically, the players that throughout this entire season have really not had fantasy value because they don't get enough touches, that's exactly what makes them the best potential stashes right now and for the future. So you're going to see for sure the top 5, and a lot of the players I'm going to mention here are on the higher end of this chart. They're on those teams because they've got stud running backs ahead of them. If something happens to that starting running back, you're going to want the replacement. And number one is number one here on the list. Seems obvious. Top running back in fantasy, Christian McCaffrey. You want whoever is the backup running back in San Francisco. Well, we know it's Brian Robinson. It's been him all year since they traded for him. You know what? Look, we're going to keep the fingers crossed. We're not going to jinx anything here. CMC has stayed healthy all year long. He's like the only guy in San Francisco who's done that somehow. We've got to prepare for the worst. It would be really foolish to not have B-Rob on your roster if you've got CMC. You just have to have him. Like, I don't care who your backup tight end is, your fifth string receiver. Make room for Brian Robinson if you have Christian McCaffrey. And even if you don't, grab him anyways so that somebody else doesn't. So we understand, rightfully so, Christian McCaffrey, the biggest bell cow there is in fantasy. But Brian Robinson, very capable. We've seen his time in Washington. It didn't end well, but at the same time, San Francisco sought him out to be the backup here. And he hasn't had that many opportunities this year, obviously, but he's been efficient. And again, this San Francisco offense is made for running backs. In fact, an interesting stat here, he's the leader among all running backs in terms of getting 3 or more yards after contact. He's done it over 50% of the time. And this Niners offense, look, it hasn't been quite itself this year with all their injuries. They're getting healthy. Brock Purdy is back, right? George Kittle is at full strength. Pearsall's there. Jennings is still out there. This offense is rolling, and it just so happens the rest of this season, including the fantasy playoffs, the 49ers are projected to have the 3rd easiest adjusted strength of schedule going forward. So, bottom line, Brian Robinson really at this point, I know it sounds kind of absurd, but he should almost be universally rostered somewhere in fantasy for the rest of the year, just in case. And to a lesser extent, but not that far behind, really, is that Rams offense. Whoever is the main guy, and Sean McVay running back is going to get major touches and have major value, especially touchdown upside. That's why Kyron Williams, despite not being really a high end prospect coming into the league, has been a rock solid RB1 basically his whole career now since he's been the guy. Before that, of course, remember Todd Gurley, best running back in all of fantasy years ago. We've seen fringe guys like Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel have major roles and major value in fantasy. And so, look, Kyron Williams is still the guy, but right behind him is Blake Corum. He's come on a little bit lately. He's shown something. And then, there's a question is he really just the backup here? Because he, for 3 straight games, had double-digit carries. And of course, Kyron Williams owners got a little bit nervous. Say, is this becoming a timeshare? It's not. Last week took a little step back. He only had 8 carries for 10 yards. And so, yes, Corum has come on lately in terms of his involvement. But, although that has dropped Kyron Williams a little bit in terms of his team rushing percentage down to 16th overall among all running backs, not top 10 anymore. But Kyron Williams for the season is still top 10 in terms of snap share. He's out there all the time. Corum doesn't really have standalone value, right? I mean, he's still just a stash, right? Nobody's starting Blake Corum on a weekly basis. At least I hope not. But you got to have Blake Corum if you got Kyron Williams, and he's a smart stash. Anyways, I've got him in a couple leagues myself, just in case something happens to Kyron. You want the main running back in that Sean McVay offense. And we know if Kyron goes down, there's not going to be some 2-3 man committee, most likely. We haven't even seen anything from rookie Jarquez Hunter. It's going to be all Corum. So he's got to be number 2. And at 3, well, one of the biggest bell cows out there is Josh Jacobs for Green Bay. That's going to change already in week 12. And so, yes, Emmanuel Wilson has been a hot pickup. He's a solid start this week, but he isn't all of a sudden a guy that we can say is part of this backfield, because as soon as Jacobs is ready to come back, Wilson will become irrelevant. He won't have value on his own. And look, Jacobs, for what it's worth, again, really hoping this is true, does not sound like it's a serious knee injury. He's definitely not out for the season. He's not on IR. He could come back as soon as the following week. And so right now, this week, sure, Emmanuel Wilson is somebody you can actually start, but going forward, he is still just going to be a stash. So while everybody's picked up Wilson to play him in week 12, he's going to get dropped in a lot of leagues as soon as Jacobs is declared healthy again. That's a mistake, right? If you got Wilson, just hang on to him, right? Not just because Jacobs could continue with some lingering knee issues, but you want the running back in this Green Bay offense too. I mean, this is not a pass first type of offense. We know it's partly because they have Jacobs that they run the ball so much. Wilson will get plenty of run, and he was fine last week. 10 carries, 41 yards in the ground, and a touchdown. Tremendous touchdown upside here. And Green Bay's schedule really isn't too bad down the stretch either. For his career, a couple years so far in Green Bay, he averages 4.7 yards per carry. He's been an effective runner, and there's really nobody else that's going to split much time with him. You'll see a little bit of Chris Brooks just to give him a breather. Brooks is just a guy who'll be out there on passing downs, not a threat to Wilson's potential workload. I'm sure there's a couple of names I haven't even mentioned that you're waiting and wondering where do they fall on this list. We'll get there. Reminder here, before the season ends, for some reason you haven't subscribed to our channel, take a second, click that subscribe button, and of course, always give us a thumbs up. We definitely appreciate it. All right, now the one running back who really has been on a fair amount of fantasy rosters throughout the season, I'm not sure if that'll change or not. Interestingly enough, it's Tyler Algier for the Falcons. Of course, we know Bijan, one of the best running backs out there. You want his backup because Algier, on occasion, actually does have standalone value. We saw the other day, much to the chagrin of Bijan owners, Algier scored a pair of touchdowns, continues to get the ball near the goal line instead of Robinson. Now, as far as the rest of the season, this is a whole different game, though, because, this Falcons offense has got to, by default, look different. Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback, is done for the season. Drake London out for at least a week, probably more than that. What's going to go on here with the Kirk Cousins-led Falcons? Well, Coach Raheem Morris was asked, is this offense going to look different because of all that? And he said it's fair to say it'll look different. But what exactly does that mean? It could just be stating the obvious. We have a different quarterback than we have been, and we're without our number one receiver. Of course, it'll look different. We have to throw the ball to different players. What does it mean for the running game, though? Does this mean some people have gone so far as to interpret it as we're not just going to give Bijan the ball as much as possible? Maybe we're going to mix in some more Algier, give Bijan some breathers. Maybe we'll just try to run the ball more. So even if Bijan still has the same amount of touches, maybe Algier gets more opportunities because they don't want to have to try to pass the ball as much as possible. Not sure what that means. It could mean nothing, right? I'm not going to read into the coach speak too much. But it's fair to assume they might lean on Algier a little bit more throughout the rest of this season. And for what it's worth, the Falcons also projected to have the fifth easiest strength of schedule in terms of the remainder of this season. So while it's fair to be a little nervous overall about this Atlanta offense, that's more than fair, actually. Look, Algier is still going to be a part of it. And I mean, look, if something happens to Bijan, which is still why you stash a handcuff like him in the first place, you're going to see a ton of Algier. Now, it's almost hard to believe that we could put the backup running back for the Philadelphia Eagles so far down as number 4 on this list. But this has not been a typical season for the Eagles or Saquon Barkley. I mean, look, Saquon, of course, the best player in all fantasy a season ago, just not quite looked the same. In fact, this whole Eagles offense, it's not just Barkley, right? It's some ups and downs. They're still getting wins. It doesn't matter. Their defense is good enough that this doesn't affect them in real life. It affects us in fantasy, right? Barkley, now we actually have to question, do I really start him over, this other potentially really good running back? I'm still starting Barkley myself. But on the other hand, look at this Eagles team. They're hard to believe 19th in terms of overall rushing yards this season. You expect them to be first, if not at least top 5, 19th, and they're only averaging 3.9 yards per carry. It just shows you that season to season, things change. So all that to say, the backup running back here, if something happens to Barkley, is Tank Bigsby. They acquired him from the Jags preseason. That happened partly because of Will Shipley injury in the preseason, partly because of Will Shipley fumble, and they just didn't trust him. Tank Bigsby is a good running back who just hasn't had a shot here. The limited time he has, mainly that one game when Saquon got hurt a few weeks ago, I mean, he was effective. He's on season, 22 carries for 168 yards. That's 7.6 yards per carry. I doubt that continues, but at the same time, we know Tank can get the job done. So, look, I'm not going to say that he would give some sort of a boost to this Eagles offense compared to Barkley. I still think Barkley will be fine the rest of the season. But despite the fact that the Eagles have disappointed relative to last year, you want the number 2 running back here, and it's Tank Bigsby. Now, outside of CMC and Bijan, one running back who arguably even more so has been just a league winner so far, the one that we do not want to see go down with injuries, Jonathan Taylor. If that happens, it's probably going to be rookie DJ Giddens who gets the call. Although these days it's fair to wonder if that's even the case because we haven't seen anybody other than JT getting the ball, which is a good thing, right? Now, DJ Giddens, you may remember way back in week 1 of the season opener, we saw this rookie get 12 carries and look pretty good. You may not believe this, but it's true. I remember very clearly there were some people worried about Jonathan Taylor and whether he was going to cede carries to DJ Giddens. Obviously, that didn't happen. Look, that was just a game script thing. They were up way early in that game. They were winning big in a blowout, and so they just gave Giddens some run, right? Well, since then, we've barely seen him. In fact, Giddens hasn't even touched the ball in a game since October 5th. That's week 5. And he's only gotten a carry in 3 games total this season. So again, the question is, are we sure that he is the handcuff here to JT? And look, it may not be the case. Tyler Goodson has gotten a little bit of run here and there, but he's mainly in there because he can do work in pass protection. And as a pass catcher, he does stuff on special teams. Like, if they need a runner, they need somebody to carry the load in place of Jonathan Taylor, it's going to be Giddens. He's a talented runner. He'll get his shot. I mean, hopefully he doesn't get this shot. But again, if you've got JT, I think Giddens is just a no-brainer to stash. And if not, if you're in a deep enough league, you could get away with stashing him anyways. A prime example of how we never know exactly how the season's going to play out. Chuba Hubbard has gone from, a solid RB2, guy that should kind of help carry the load all season long to a handcuff. He's the backup here. He is waiting for Rico Dowdle to falter or get injured to get his chance again after signing a big contract last year after having his breakout season. Yeah, things change quickly in the NFL, but look, Rico has been great. Dave Canales, cannot just ignore the fact that Rico has looked amazing and Chuba has not. I mean, that injury early in the season obviously affected him, but even since coming back from injury, he's not been himself. He's averaging just 3.7 yards per carry on the year. And I mean, look, he hasn't had anything close to a big game before injury, after injury. Just has done nothing basically. He's turning out to be one of the bigger busts in terms of running backs. And like, I think he wasn't drafted super high, but it was high enough that he definitely was a drag on your team early on. So a couple of things are happening to keep him barely afloat here, at least as a stash. Number one, Carolina has been really good running the ball. Mainly that's due to Rico Dowdle, but they have committed to running. You figure if something does happen to Rico and he's out of the picture, I mean, Hubbard should be able to at least do enough to be maybe a fringe RB2 and a little bit farther removed from his injury and obviously getting rest a lot more on the sidelines here. Look, Chuba should be fresh for the rest of the season. We don't want it to happen. Rico has been a great story this season. Want to continue to see him. One of the best pickups of all of fantasy, probably the best waiver wire ad anybody made this season. You would just like to see him carry your team to victory, but it wouldn't hurt to just at least keep Chuba in your mind. And we got the new Chuba, another former late round pick from Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon. This one's a little trickier because Gordon will clearly not be anything close to Devon Achane in terms of replacing him if necessary, because Achane is basically their leading receiver and their leading rusher, and Gordon is not that type of player, but who is? Like, there is no other running back who's quite like Devon Achane. And the thing is with Gordon, some people were worried he wasn't even going to be the backup runner because we saw all of a sudden Jalen Wright get healthy. His guy who we presumed would be the RB2 there this season started to get a little bit of run here the last couple of weeks. Yeah, that is all dead. You know what? That one game where he got like 9 carries right before the trade deadline, that was purely a showcase, right? Hoping somebody would give them something, some sort of draft pick for Jalen Wright. Yeah, last week, just 1 carry. Meanwhile, Gordon ran 9 times for 45 yards and a touchdown. Look, he's been as effective as he can be given the state of this offense and the way things have gone in Miami. He's been effective in spurts. He can get the job done between the tackles. Again, if something happens to Achan, don't expect 5, 6 receptions a game from Ollie Gordon, and you don't expect those 50-plus-yard runs. He's not that type of runner, but he would definitely get a ton of carries here. And Jalen Wright, I still think would just be a minor factor. Then at number 9, I mean, look, Ray Davis has not done a whole lot this year. But I do still think that if something happens to James Cook, he's the guy you want. Like Ty Johnson, I get it. He's had a role. He's a pass catcher. Been the one that's kind of stepped in before Davis, in fact, a lot of times. But this isn't because they favor Johnson necessarily. He just does something different than Davis does, and Cook hasn't been hurt. And so Johnson's role, I think, is Johnson's role. He's more of a pass catcher. He's there on those third downs. And Ray Davis is that early down kind of back, a bigger back. He'll do more like James Cook type things if there is no James Cook. Also, have to admit, in the small opportunity Ray Davis has had this year, he's not looked good. 24 carries for 44 yards, but it's a small sample, right? Still a very, very, very small sample. And now Buffalo offense, Buffalo, which by the way is second overall in rushing yards as a team. I get it. A lot of that's because of Josh Allen, but it's not just because Josh Allen. James Cook has been great all season. Ray Davis clearly would have touchdown upside. And number 10, we go with a guy who seemingly went from bell cow to backup in just a matter of weeks. Jordan Mason in Minnesota. Yeah, since Aaron Jones has come back from injury, I mean, his role just keeps increasing. We already knew he was going to be the guy on pass catching downs. Jordan Mason is not a pass catching back, but Aaron Jones is now clearly the lead back in terms of early downs and rushing opportunities. And Mason just continues to fade here. Last 2 games total, Mason has 10 rush attempts. 3 of the last 4 games, single digit rush attempts. So yeah, Mason, we've been saying it for weeks. He's droppable, right? You don't need him. But what if Aaron Jones gets injured again, which has already happened this year, happened last year? Yeah, Mason by default will be the guy who goes back to getting 15 plus carries and will have touchdown upside. Now, I know it's hard to really have a lot of confidence in this Vikings offense with JJ McCarthy, but at the same time, this is why you'd think they would want to lean on the running game as much as possible. So I can't say I love Mason. This is why he's at the bottom of this list, but Mason does have workhorse potential without Aaron Jones in the mix. All right, keep doing it. Keep being proactive. Stash now, look ahead. That's the name of the game. That's how you win. You make those smart moves before anybody else even is aware that they should be making them. So if you got room at the end of your bench, go for a guy that has massive upside and can actually help you when it matters the most, which is the playoffs. But you still want to win this week, right? Week 12. You need your start sit advice. Of course, it's in the playlist.